Hello and welcome to Mastering Education, a podcast all about helping students learn better. I am really excited to have Dr. Grace Major on the podcast today, who is coming on really to kind of help us talk through some of the mental health issues going on for young people today, hopefully to give some advice or some guidance on how some of these maybe could be offset, maybe talking about things like exam stress or learning stress, friendship group stress, social media and things like that. I'm really excited. At the end of the podcast, for the very first time, I've got questions that have been asked from a local school to me, which we're going to put to Grace. I'm going to try and answer some of them as well. And hopefully that'll be really interesting. So stick around to the end for that. But with that said, hello, Grace.
Hello.
Thank you
so
and welcome. Welcome onto the podcast. So the first thing I think that I wanted to talk about was actually how prevalent mental health sort of issues are today for young people. I was sort of really drawn by one statistic from the NHS, which for non-UK viewers is our National Health Service, that said approximately 1 in 4 young people aged 17 to 24 in England experience what they determine as mental health problems. What do you think they mean by that? What do you think a mental health problem is from your perspective?
It's a really good question. It's a big number, isn't it? It's a quarter
crazy.
Of people that are experiencing mental health conditions at any one time. But from a psychological perspective, what we're thinking about is whether someone's experiencing kind of difficult thoughts, feelings, emotions, or physical sensations. And what we're looking at with that is it impacting their ability, their daily life? Mm-hmm. So, for example, their ability to socialize or their ability to work or study. And actually what we know is academic pressure is a significant contributor to mental health. So great that we're talking about this today, because I think it's very prevalent in the student population and becoming more and more of a conversation in young people and at school.
Yeah, I mean, to add on to that, we've got 27% for young women, which is being determined as 16 to 24, 13% for young men. What are your thoughts on that? 27% for young women and 13% reporting for young men. What are your sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we do see a difference between men and women or girls and boys, but I think also it's really important to consider these are statistics that we can measure. And unfortunately, we are still talking about actually males aren't kind of as likely as females to talk about things and to kind of share some of their worries. So we often see it in different ways. And I wonder whether at school you see that perhaps you can see boys or young men struggling a little bit, but they won't necessarily talk about it in terms of their mental health. So the statistics are a little bit hard to kind of get a real accurate understanding of really what's going on in the population. It's a rough estimate, I guess.
So yeah, perhaps that sort of idea of the stigma of having a mental health sort of problem, if we were to say, seems that it is a little bit harder to shake in boys. I mean, I work at an all boys school, and I definitely feel that there is still this sort of kind of desire to want to be strong or masculine, the idea that strong boys or male figures don't get upset. And I know there's quite a lot of sort of society sort of movements around trying to break that stigma down, but it's kind of maybe feels like at only 13%, we've got a long way to go.
We do. I think we're getting there. If you look at the generations, we're certainly having more conversations. And I think one of the great things about the younger population is that they are talking about it. And we're seeing it. I think we're going to talk a bit about social media, but it's all over social media. And I think young people are feeling really empowered to kind of have their own narrative about their feelings and their emotions and their mental health as much as their physical health. So we are starting to see a shift, but of course, there's a long way to go. And one of the suggestions that I always have is talk about it. Young people really should feel empowered to talk about their feelings and their emotions as much as possible. But there's also a big responsibility on the adults around them to, as parents, guardians, teachers, to open that door and have that kind of open dialogue with young people so that we talk about it, because we're so good at talking about physical health now. It comes up all the time, but we really need to make sure that that's is in place as much for mental health.
Yeah, so to sort of encourage it and, to maybe have, definitely to create the sense of a sort of safe space, I think, at school. I mean, when I spoke to my school about having you onto the podcast and sort of opening up a discussion with some of the students and allowing them to ask questions, we have like mental health ambassadors at the school. So sort of people in a particular year group who, I guess, boys might feel that they could go to ask a mental health question about and stuff like that. So I think that's a good step. That feels like we're kind of going into the right direction. But maybe for those who haven't fallen into the statistic because they maybe don't realize or recognize that they might be experiencing some sort of mental health issue. What would you say about that in terms of like, how do I even know if I do have a mental health issue? Yeah.
So there's lots of different mental health presentations. So let's think about some of the really key things. And what we're looking at here is a change for that person. So it might be very different for your friend as it will be for you. So change in kind of how you're feeling is really important. But generally, you might be noticing things like more intense or more severe emotions or feelings. You might notice that your appetite is gone or you're overeating. You might notice that you're struggling to sleep. You might notice difficulties in concentration, which I think is obviously a big one for those at school. Or you might notice that you're feeling generally quite low or anxious. Those are some of the common kind of characteristics. And what we're looking at is, are those things impacting your daily life, and have they been there for 2 weeks or more?
So basically being in tune with yourself and noticing changes within yourself.
Absolutely. And sometimes we're not that great at that, particularly when we're in the thick of it. So those people around you might notice it also, and listening to them if they're kind of noticing, if family members are noticing that you're not perhaps doing so well, or that perhaps you're a bit more irritable or kind of not wanting to do things that you used to do, taking those things and noting them is important.
Cool. And what about people who might notice those changes and are really worried that, and this is really sad, but might be worried that they're not going to be taken seriously? What would you say to someone who might be thinking that way, that, I'm just worried that nothing's going to be done anyway. I feel very alone in that.
Yeah, I'd really empathize. It's really common. And it's not just common in young people. It's common in adults too. People are incredibly worried to share their feelings and their biggest fears with other people. So absolutely, it's okay to be scared. Sometimes what we know is that from the stats is that people generally feel better and feel good for doing so. So sharing your problems, people generally feel relieved that they have shared them, and hold in mind that adults are not immune to mental health difficulties. Actually, what we know is 1 in 4 people at any time will have a mental health difficulty, so or a condition. So hopefully you'll find an adult that understands. And if they don't, it doesn't mean that your feelings aren't important. What it means is perhaps that person isn't able to help you just at this moment in time. So do kind of try and find somebody else that perhaps is able to hear your worries and your concerns.
Who do you think should be the first person you speak to? Because I guess I suppose it really does depend a lot. I'm sort of answering my own question here, but I guess it really sort of depends on what the relationship is like, first of all, with people at home. I imagine that there will be some home environments where you might not feel comfortable with talking to a parent. And then that would, of course, hopefully push you into the direction of perhaps a friend, maybe even a teacher. But I guess it's all very, very dependent on your own social situation. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. And there's really no hard and fast rule about who you can speak to. The important thing is that you speak to somebody. So that can be a parent, a guardian. It can be a family member. So you might have a cousin that you can relate to, or an aunt or an uncle. But you might also have someone at school school, there's some teachers are brilliant. And I think, like you said, there's lots of work going into schools with training, and teachers are so kind of dedicated to their students. So trying to find that one teacher that you have that rapport with, that you can start this conversation with would be really important. But also if you have a hobby outside of school, so if you have a coach or a trusted adult elsewhere that you could speak to, there's really kind of no set person, but also your peers, your friends. That's often where these conversations start, is talking to a friend and saying, look, I feel really stuck. I don't know who to talk to, and having a chat with them and see what they think.
And I guess by breaking down that stigma that we talked about earlier, hopefully that conversation becomes much more normal, where actually now it might be the case that, I feel a bit uncomfortable maybe bringing that up with a friend, but then the friend might be going through the same thing. And actually, if we all just got rid of this idea that mental health, like we shouldn't be having problems, everything should be perfect in our lives, then actually we could maybe get over holding this kind of stuff in. Because as you said, most people, we know that people feel better having shared their thoughts or feelings, or negative thoughts and feelings. Why do you think that is, out of interest? Why do you think it does make us feel better? What's kind of the thought behind that?
So I guess there's the old saying of a problem shared is a problem halved, but it feels like you're doing something about it. So keeping things in, and you're consumed by them, and actually sharing it and saying it to someone else often takes the power out of it. It gives you some ownership of what's going on, and it helps you feel less out of control, and you're focusing on something that is within your control. And perhaps it's often the case people then feel a bit empowered, particularly if they're getting a good response. And I guess some of those stats, hopefully, are those people are experiencing a positive and a helpful response from the person back. So I think it's probably on both sides that we're seeing that cool. kind of feeling.
So I think probably, I mean, generally the people that tend to engage with the podcast are definitely, I think, if I get the numbers right, it is 16 to 24. So it's exactly this age group that we're kind of talking about. I think we could probably say that academic pressure and sort of exam stress is probably going to be, I would imagine, the time when they are most vulnerable to having sort of quite negative feelings, and as we might call like mental health issues or problems or something like that. 80% of people that were surveyed on this said that exam stress was one of the times when they felt most worried. What are some things perhaps that people could do, in your opinion, when they're in those very high stressed sort of moments? Because we're talking about a sort of maybe 1 to 2 month window. Do you think there's anything that people could do in those times to maybe sort of offset some of those negative thoughts or feelings?
Yeah, I mean, 80% is a big number, isn't it?
Massive.
It's huge. And I see it in all the young people I work with that are going through their exams, and either kind of GCSEs, A-levels or university. It's such a stressful time, and they feel incredibly overwhelmed. So I definitely saying that people aren't alone in their stress. And actually, unfortunately, exams are meant to be challenging. So it certainly brings that stress out in people. So what we're thinking about is perhaps the difference between helpful stress and chronic stress. So when we're thinking about stress, what happens in the body is we're releasing things like cortisol, which is our stress hormone, and we're releasing adrenaline. And those things can in the short term be really helpful because they help motivation, they enhance performance, they help us focus. But in the long run, they can be quite impactful on our health. And that's when we're thinking a bit more about chronic stress. And that's absolutely when we want to be thinking about what we can do to help. And sometimes I think about this in terms of an analogy of a phone. So if you imagine that you've got your phone battery that we're all very precious about, making sure it's charged. But what we have is, if you imagine you've got lots of different apps open, and the more apps you have open, the quicker your battery drains, and eventually it will go into kind of low battery mode, and then it will shut down. And what we want to make sure, we also have lots of apps open. So for example, we might be studying, our students might be studying, have deadlines, have chores to do, they have socializing, they've got to tidy their room, all those sorts of things. And you have loads of apps open and your battery drains quicker. So what we need to make sure is we're doing things to stop our battery from shutting down, and making sure that it's regularly charged. So that's with things like self-care. And what I often say to students when I'm working with them is let's really, and to their parents and guardians, is let's go back to the basics, because trying to do things that are really complicated, it's hard enough to try and find the time to do the basics. So let's just think about what are the real foundations that are kind of the non-negotiables. And those things I would be saying are things like your sleep. So making sure you're getting enough really good quality sleep, nutrition, making sure you're eating well. And I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about these things, but exercise, making sure you're doing some exercise if you can, of any type, anything that you find enjoyable, manageable, and making sure that you're socializing too, making sure that you're finding time for these things is really important.
So I guess that's something interesting to think about. We've talked about, or you just mentioned about dealing with the apps. So we've got all of these apps open. They're multiple subjects, multiple exam papers that they're dealing with, and then you're telling me to exercise. And what if I'm like, yeah, but that's another app that I've got to then open, and then that's going to drain my battery. Yeah. But as you said, it's the non-negotiables. So it's like, okay, in order for me to cope with this stress at this time, I've got to prioritize certain things. And number one, it's got to be my health, because there's no point studying really, really hard for the maths exam if I'm very unwell, because I am so stressed about it. So the non-negotiables, sleep. What is a good number of hours for sleep in your opinion? Yeah.
So again, it's really individualized, but for our teens, they need more sleep.
Yeah.
It's really, really important. So I would be saying between 7 and 9 hours of really good quality sleep.
Excellent. Exercise. I think the NHS says, this is off the top of my head, I think they say it's 30 minutes a week. I think that's what they say as a good number. Have you got any sort of perspective or thought on that? If someone was to say, okay, cool, I mean, I'm on board with the idea of exercising, but what would that look like? I know it could be as simple as taking a walk in the park or something like that. In terms of numbers, if we were to put a sort of time on it, would you say anything different?
From a physical health perspective, what they're looking at is around 3 to 5 times a week. So that sometimes might feel quite unmanageable.
Yep.
What we know is actually you start to see improvements in 10 or 20 minutes. So even if every day you could go for a short walk, that would be really helpful. What we know is team exercise is kind of the best for improving mood and helping physical mental health, because it's kind of a double whammy. Not only are you exercising, but you're also socializing. So team sports are really important, but any type of exercise that you enjoy, that could be something that is more like yoga or kind of slow movement based, or it could be a walk with a friend, or you could go to the gym. It really, really varies. And I guess also bonus points if you go outside, because nature has a huge impact too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I've got a park right by my house. And I think when I do get an opportunity to walk in that park, it feels so different to walking at the gym. It's because I do both. So I do like incline walking on a treadmill, but just walking because I can't run because my knees are ruined. But it's so different doing it outside. It's actually crazy, I think. And I think there's a lot to do with that. It's perhaps like the natural light. It is about being amongst nature. And I think it is like just oxygen levels, like oxygenating your body a bit more.
Some fresh air, absolutely. And a different environment. But even it goes as far as what we know, there's people in kind of more urban areas that don't have access to parks and more green spaces. And what we know is even them having a photograph in their room of an outdoor space even helps improve mood. So the evidence is pretty compelling. So I guess some advice for those that maybe are in more of the concrete parts of the world with less of the parks and the lakes and things like that. Having kind of plants in your room, or a really nice image on your laptop or on your wall is just as helpful. Well, not just as helpful, but it is still helpful.
It's still doing something. Cool. Right. My favorite topic. I really am so looking forward to talking to someone who knows their stuff about this, because not ever since I've been a teacher, but certainly over the last, I would say, 5 years. So just before COVID all kind of kicked off, I think social media was something I used to work at university level. And it was something that I quit social media in 2016.
Well done you.
And I remember telling my students that, and they couldn't understand the concept that I would ever want to do that. Like, it was sort of the riskiest thing I could ever do. So yeah, I got rid of Facebook in 2016, and I kept telling my students, I've never been happier, guys. I promise you, I've never been happier, for several reasons. But, you know, most importantly, things like, I'm more focused on myself rather than other people, because I'm not being bombarded on my phone of like people's day, people's habits and how they're feeling. I don't need to worry about any of that. I can just purely focus on myself. Yeah, it felt like for that generation that's now a little bit more younger than me, for them, they can't see how you could possibly live without it. It's become so ingrained in their lives and routines.
Part of their life, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So the American Psychological Association said that 41% of teens with the highest social media rate, they rated their mental health overall as poor or very poor. That's 41% of teens with high usage. We can maybe talk about what high usage might look like. What are your thoughts on social media? Is it something that comes up in your work at all, working with younger people? What are your thoughts?
It comes up all the time. I think parents really struggle with knowing what to do, or family members, how to manage social media. But I'm going to give a bit of a balanced view here, because absolutely there are some concerns about social media, and it really does need to be managed quite carefully. But there are also some real positives. So in terms of what we know, the impact of social media, sadly and worryingly, we're seeing a reduction in attention span. So young people, our younger generation, their attention span is actually shortening, and the social media is encouraging that through these really short kind of reels and kind of really addictive algorithms that are making it very quick to young people, quick to swipe through different stories and images, because it's exciting for the brain. But it is impacting attention span. And sadly, another knock-on effect that we're seeing is the impact on social skill development. So young people are not going out and engaging face-to-face as much. So they're losing some of those interpersonal skills that, as they become older and they are employed, or they're going for interviews and things like that, that will be really important that they have those skills. We're also seeing a big impact on sleep. You can see sleep is incredibly important, the amount of times we've spoken about it today, but the blue light, staying up very late and on social media, it's very hard to kind of come off social media. It's impacting the quality of sleep young people have, and then it's counterproductive because they're struggling the next day to concentrate. So absolutely, there are some concerns, and we know that also it's correlated with low mood in terms of those statistics that you've just said. It definitely impacts low mood. It impacts body image, and there's loads of comparison that's happening on social media that's particularly unhelpful. But on the flip side, it is the main source of information for young people at the moment, particularly for mental health. So I think we have a great opportunity for young people to really learn about things and get educated, providing that they are accessing the right kind of channels and learning from the right people. And that's a really important part, is that they're connecting with healthy and safe people online. But that is a big part, is that it's a big source of education, so they can feel really empowered to find out information on their own. And also they've got this access to a real wealth of people, so the opportunity to gain diverse perspectives is brilliant. So they can understand kind of real cultural differences or real kind of different perspectives about some of their views or challenge some of the beliefs that they might hold or the people might hold around them. So it's an opportunity I think the older generations didn't have, that is really helpful, and particularly for those people who maybe haven't quite found their group at their school or at their kind of clubs. It helps, particularly those with kind of more niche hobbies or interests. It gives them access to different people online.
Really interesting. I've written down embrace the opportunity for the benefit. Mm-hmm. Embrace the opportunity for the benefit. So something that just came to my mind there, and it links into what you said about good quality sources of information, things that can help you with mental health. I imagine that like cleaning, like almost like cleaning out your social media might be a really good idea. Yeah. So for example, if you find or if you recognize that there is someone that you are following on social media who is putting out content that might make you feel uncomfortable or might upset you, or you might be aware that this probably isn't the healthiest thing for me, having sort of just the ability to just say, block or unfriend or whatever or something like that. I think it should be really, really important to be said.
Absolutely.
Clean it out.
Absolutely. And often a really helpful indicator for that is noting how you feel after you've looked at their content. So this might be friends, but it also, or people that you know, but it also might be kind of celebrities and influencers. And unfortunately, they're not always the most helpful role models for each person. So thinking about when you look at that content, how do you feel about yourself? Are you falling into those comparison traps where you're comparing yourself to those kind of accounts where they're making themselves, they're showing only the best parts of their day? Or are you following accounts where you come away and you feel really great about yourselves, really inspired? And that's a time to take note. It's no different from friends. You get an intuition about how you feel when you're with people, and you spend a bit more time with them if you feel good around them. And that's the same with social media. So trying to be really boundaried about who you're following and who you're connecting with is really important.
Yeah, I suppose it could almost be seen as like holding your social media app to account. Basically saying like, are you showing me the right thing? Yes or no? I don't want to see any more of that person, because I don't, as you've just said, I don't think they make me feel good. Get rid of that, and actually like trying to keep on top of that and actually really judge, like, is that content that is helping me? Yeah. Because if it isn't helping me, what is the point of it? Like, I should really get rid of that. And I think maybe I was very extreme in saying, I'm just going to delete it. And I did, and never got back on it. And maybe that is too extreme. And maybe actually I was wrong in telling my students to do that, because I definitely went on a little bit of a march and said like, right, everyone here, you should delete Facebook or whatever. And maybe I was wrong in that and a bit naive, because actually it has become so ingrained, and there are benefits and there are positives staying connected with family or friends who might now be further away from you. Real positive. We like that. But I think it's about having it a little bit more, I think just being a bit smarter about it as a young person.
I think so. And what we know is the two important things to think about is kind of how you're using it and for how long. So having a balance. So ideally, you don't want to be on social media for longer than 30, 60 minutes a day. Okay. And that sounds like quite a lot to some people, but for the younger population, if you use those time limit apps, the time actually goes very quickly. You'll be very, very surprised how quickly that time goes. So I would suggest that limiting that is going to be really helpful. I forgot my train of thought.
So we would call that a healthier boundary. A healthier boundary with your social media might be to use a time limit app.
Absolutely. And then the other things that you can think of is trying to come off of it for a little while, seeing how you feel. And then, like I said, not falling into those kind of comparison traps. So while you're comparing yourself to people, and making sure that you're certainly coming away from it before bedtime. That would be really important. But also one of the other things that we know is really, really helpful is how we're engaging in social media. So are we being really passive, kind of just looking at content, or are we being active? And that's where we see the benefit of social media. So those pros that I'm talking about is about kind of time, how often we're on social media, but how we're using it as well, for being really proactive on social media. That's where we see more of the benefits than if we're seeing the kind of passive interaction. What
is proactive? What is it to be proactive with social media? What do you mean by that?
So I think it's more about being really conscious about what you're engaging in, and perhaps having some helpful dialogues on social media. Okay. So connecting with people, having conversations rather than just a kind of silent observer.
Okay.
So contributing to the conversation.
Interesting. But I guess sort of with some sort of positivity, right? And because I think one of the reasons I sort of stopped enjoying social media was this idea of trolling, which is basically bullying. Like, that's basically what it is. But with the anonymity of the internet and a message board, you know, even like the comment section on a Facebook video or something like that, you can almost, even if you're not participating in that, reading those comments, I can imagine, could really get you down. If you've got someone you're following on social media who you really like, and you see some negative comments about them, I imagine that would make you feel really upset.
Absolutely.
That could be quite difficult.
Yeah. I think it's more coming with kindness. And sometimes we can't be positive. Sometimes you might disagree with someone's viewpoint. And that's actually really important, that we have a variety of viewpoints and we're having conversations where it's not all agreeable. But that can always be done with respect and kindness. And I think that's probably the important, is to focus on how would you speak to a friend, or how would you want someone to speak to you in those moments? You don't necessarily have to agree with their opinion, but one, do you need to say it? Is it going to add to the conversation to say it? Or sometimes it's better to keep things to yourself.
Kindness. Number one, right? I mean, absolutely. I often say to my students who are dealing with stress, be your own best friend, not your own worst enemy. Which is basically to say, support yourself, don't break yourself down and say negative things like, you're being rubbish, why are you feeling like that, all those sorts of things. I actually say, no, be more supportive. If your best friend came to you and said, I'm feeling really down about this, you're not going to go, oh, well, that's stupid. Why are you feeling like that? Well, but you are rubbish. You just would never do that. So really, you should be a best friend for yourself. But I think you can extend that to other parts of the internet, which is like, do I really need to say that really horrible thing online to that person? Or can I actually either just not say anything, or can I construct it in a way that is a bit more beneficial to them? And I think just having awareness, being kind to each other should really be the number one goal, I think, in life. Compassion towards other people and towards yourself. And people vary in terms of how compassionate they can be to themselves or to others. But that is a really great way to phrase it, is how would you speak to a friend in that moment? And that helps you to be compassionate towards yourself. Absolutely. Really good point. So to kind of summarize, I think the social media thing, I think I want to say, if I was to say, how do we make social media a positive place for mental health, for our own mental health, it would be set a time limit and try and aim for somewhere between 30 to 60 minutes a day. And I would say maybe perhaps particularly when you're in those stressful times, could be exams, whereas probably you should be spending time maybe revising or looking after your mental health through exercise or something like that. Definitely limit it to 30 to 60 minutes a day.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the maximum. So if you can do 0 minutes, brilliant.
Even better.
What we know is even just having a phone next to you and seeing it kind of ping or light up, it takes your attention very quickly. It kind of robs your attention from you, and it makes it very hard to focus. So in some ways, you're going to be revising for longer because you're distracting yourself. So trying to be really boundaried, put it in a different room. You're going to get your work done far quicker with it away from you, but also having some detox time. And there's no problem in trying out your hypothesis that coming off social media makes you feel great. Absolutely. I've come off social media since the beginning of January, and the the amount of time that I have saved is incredible. I've got so much more done.
Yeah.
And I feel great. I'm sleeping better. So perhaps just trying it. There's no harm. You're really not going to miss out on that much coming away from it. And the only way to find that out is to test the hypothesis.
Yeah.
Sometimes we feel like when we're so invested, it's hard to step away.
I wonder, well, that's what the social media companies want. They want you to have
really
the FOMO, the fear of missing out, right? They want that. They want it to feel like almost if you weren't on social media, that you are just going to be missing out on so much good stuff. But of course, it's recognizing that it's not always good. So to add to how to make it a positive place for mental health, cleaning up your social media at a point would be really helpful. Asking yourself, how does it make me feel? Is it a benefit? Is it not a benefit? And then clean as you see fit. Perhaps adding in as well to that concept of at exam time, what can social media be used for? Well, maybe it's about cleaning up your sort of almost like exam time social media. So like, for example, you might follow someone who's really good at revision tips and revision guides. You know, I follow quite a lot of them just to see what teachers are sort of doing or saying or whatever. That might be really beneficial for your 30 to 60 minutes a day, but maybe not so beneficial to be looking at insert influencer's name here who just does like wacky crazy things or and
I'd add to that also other students that are perhaps going through the same exams as you, and they're talking about it and they're talking about their stress and worries, because that can kind of perpetuate your own worries. So sometimes it can help because you know that you're not alone, and absolutely that's really important to validate and acknowledge that other people are stressed and it's not just you. But sometimes it can kind of send us into feeling more anxious, and it's no different to standing outside the exam hall and standing with friends that are really worried about the exam, and it builds worry up in you too. So thinking about how helpful is this? Am I gaining something from this, or am I coming away feeling more anxious than when I started? Yeah,
I'm convinced that my fear of flying came from my mother, who was also terrified of flying. Yeah. And I remember when I was a kid, I wasn't scared of flying. And then the more I flew with her, the more I worried about it, because she would get so panicked and it would almost like, sort of end up on me.
Well, we read our safety signals from other people. So people around us are not feeling safe. Unfortunately, we often feel the same. Sometimes we can pull other people to feel grounded, but particularly around exam time, you might be overwhelmed by the number of people that are feeling anxious. Yeah. It's a really, really difficult time.
And it's completely normal and it's completely okay to feel worried about the exam time. And actually what I say to students is just talk to your friend group about that. Don't hold it in. Don't think, no, it's my problem, because actually your entire year group is going through absolutely the same thing. Yeah. And, I firmly believe that everyone will have at least one person that they could talk to.
Yeah.
And talk to them.
Everyone is feeling the exam pressure, whether you're kind of finding your exams a challenge, or whether you're feeling like you're going to get really good grades. The pressure is there for everyone. So do talk to your friends, do have conversations with them, but know that just because the exams are difficult doesn't mean that you're failing or it's all going wrong. Unfortunately, that's the nature of exams.
So talking about let's say we've cleaned up our social media. We feel better about that. We're thinking more about our exercise and sleep quality and things like that. We're doing pretty well. Are there any other sort of self-care mechanisms or anything like that you think could be something that someone could incorporate into their routine or just their daily life to help even more with kind of a good mental health space?
There's lots of things. There really is. And it really depends on the time. And sometimes it's helpful to think about another analogy here, but often I describe it as the weather. So imagine that some days it's sunny outside and you're feeling okay. And other times it's kind of a bit drizzly. And so you might be feeling a bit down, but you're managing. And then other days there's a storm and you're really struggling. And we check the weather and we kind of dress accordingly. So, for example, it's the same with our mental health. Checking your weather, how you're feeling, and managing accordingly. So, for example, you might put an umbrella up, which might be chatting to a friend. You might put a coat on, which might be more of that self-care, or you might seek shelter, which means that you might get some more professional support. So, depending on how your weather is really going to vary on what strategies you use. And the strategies that work for you might be very different to what works for your friends and your family. So it's really finding what works. There is really no perfect recipe of what works for some people. Sometimes someone trying to think about going for 30 minutes of exercise 5 days a week when they're doing their exams is incredibly stressful. For some people, it's non-negotiable. So I think it's more about finding what works for you. Focus on those foundations, and over and above that, find kind of those individual strategies.
So what we know that works then is actually kind of some of the things that we spoke about earlier, which is sleep. If we just reel those off again. So it's sleep, getting more sleep, having a healthy boundary with social media and technology, speaking to someone, whether it be a friend, a relative, or a teacher, and some form of exercise, gentle exercise, or team sport ideally, or something like that. Just generally just kind of doing something active. Yeah. Those are some things that what could work.
And socializing. So socialize with your friends and family, but also have some boundaries with that. It's okay to say no, but it's also okay to step away from your revision. And then nutrition. So hydration is a big one. Your body is filled with water. All your cells are made up of water. So making sure you're really hydrated, you're not overdoing the caffeine is really important. But the reason I encourage sleep so much is because your REM sleep, your random eye movement sleep, when your kind of eyes move back and forward in your sleep, that's when you're processing your emotional experiences. You're also laying down your memories, and your sleep is where you're getting all your kind of restoration, and your body's restoring itself. So it helps your immune system. And it helps your cognitive ability and your memory. So its benefits are great, and particularly when you're revising, getting good quality sleep is so important.
Yeah, this concept of the all-nighter, when you're studying or cramming for an exam, is so counterproductive. It's crazy, because if you were to have a really, really bad night's sleep the night before an exam because you were busy revising or doing something, that's probably the worst thing you could do, right? Because you're going to be tired, and that's probably going to, I don't know if there's any data behind this, but I imagine that the cortisol and the stress level will be higher the less sleep you have.
Yeah, so the cortisol in the short term can be helpful, which I think is why some people do the cramming, because they can run on adrenaline for a period of time. But what we know is very rarely do we have just one exam. Yeah. Often there's an exam that afternoon or the next day or the day after, and they go on sometimes for a couple of weeks. So maintaining that way of working is really hard to do in the long run. And actually, I think what you said earlier is it really lowers your immune system. And we see that a lot in students. I'm sure you see it. Your students kind of dropping like flies towards as they go
end of term.
Because they're unwell and their immune systems have really decreased. So it's not recommended.
So I'm guessing to really, really help your immune system, it's going to be sleep, right? It's going to be recovery.
Really good nutrition, really good hydration, all those sorts of things, getting out in the sunlight.
Okay, cool. Vitamin D. Hard in winter here in England. So in terms of like anxiety, feeling sad and stress, I guess they're all sort of connected in a way, and it's about finding what works for you. Trying things out and talking to someone is generally just to kind of summarize that. What are some good habits to get into? Are there any kind of habits you recommend for people or young people to try and change the gear of what they're in if they are just feeling like they're in a really, really down patch? Are there any kind of just really simple kind of little daily hacks or tips or habits they could get into maybe?
Yeah. So some of the things that I would be suggesting is getting up at the same time. So having a routine, and that shouldn't just be filled with revision and studying. So having some really enjoyable things through your day that make it easier to get through. Starting your day with kind of a good healthy meal would be great. Getting out and going for a walk, but also planning your day. So having some structure, and that can be the difficult part, particularly when you're on study leave, is you've gone from a really structured environment that young people really flourish in to then no structure, and trying to manage your own time is really difficult. So planning your day, putting your more difficult tasks in the morning would be really recommended. And also hold in mind that often we're waiting to feel like we want to do something. So if you think about the gym, for example, it's a really good example that very rarely, some people do, but very rarely do you look forward to and feel like you want to go to the gym. But always afterwards, you feel better for it. So it's about doing things and not waiting to feel like you want to do them, but doing them anyway. And often that's the great way to get started. And that helps us kind of really get into the rhythm of what we're doing. But also the final thing I'd say is trying to work on being good enough and not being perfect, because what we know is being good enough leads to way better outcomes anyway. And being perfect is incredibly exhausting and really hard.
So in a way, I guess the idea that you said there about you didn't say it in these words, but like making yourself do something that's going to be good for you, even though you might not want to do it. Like, as you said, going to the gym or something like that. That's really about, I guess, self-discipline. It's about having a routine and saying, yeah, although I might not really fancy doing that right now, I know it's good for me.
Yeah.
Because I've worked out that that's the thing that works for me. So I've got to go do that. And I've got to be strict with myself a little bit. I've got to have a healthy boundary perhaps with myself where I say, come on, you can do that, Nick, actually. But also be aware of when Nick's like, actually, no, dude, you probably shouldn't go to the gym right now.
Absolutely. So there's a difference. There's self-care, isn't there? There's thinking about, I'm not pushing myself beyond my limits. And that's not the right thing for me today. But this is more about not waiting to feel like you want to do it and doing it anyway. So trying to be proactive in getting going and getting started with something that's manageable, something that's realistic. So we're not kind of setting the most difficult task for the day, but often I should imagine students are waking up thinking, I just don't want to revise today. So naming out loud, I don't want to revise, but I'm going to do that one thing this morning. I don't want to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway.
So the first question actually we had from a student was around the idea of burning out, which I guess is something that we talked about. Exam season is going to be one of those times where that's definitely going to be very, very elevated. So they said, how would you best deal with psychological burnout in order to stay motivated? And then adding in another question was, every evening I feel drained. How can I stop this? So I guess really to kind of summarize these two questions, it's about feeling like you don't have enough energy and that you are so drained, like you were talking about the apps, the battery is now at 0. What would you perhaps say to someone who was maybe feeling, or the person that was actually asking those questions, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say you are in the thick of it, and absolutely burnout is a real problem. It's a real struggle. It's really important that you try and manage it as best you can. But knowing that you say exam season, but actually it goes across a number of our seasons, doesn't it, with the mocks and things? Yep. It's a really enduring time. So trying to pace yourself through your exams is really important. Try not to kind of run out of steam right at the beginning. Often we can be really enthusiastic at the beginning and we do run out of steam and motivation. So slow and steady, and just be really realistic with what you're doing, and think about planning. So work backwards from your exam. What do you need to get done, and how much time do you have to do it? And that sometimes helps you to be far more balanced with it. But also make sure you're fitting things in your day that are for you, where you are recharging, because often we have this belief, and adults have it too, that the longer we sit at a screen, the more work we're getting done. And that's really not very true. It's more about the quality of the work we're doing rather than the length of time that we're there. So focus less on that and really just try and think about, what does my body need? If I could give it something now, if I could re-nourish my body, what would it be? Would it be that I go and have a nap? Would it be that I take a day off? Would it be that I go and meet a friend, or I go for a nice hot chocolate, anything like that? What does your body need right now that's going to make this more manageable? But know that just that you feeling burnt out and you struggling is also really okay. Your peers are also feeling very much the same. So it's not that you're doing anything wrong. It's just a warning sign, and listen to it. I'm encouraging you to really listen to what your body's telling you.
I loved what you said about being realistic, setting yourself like realistic goals. It's what I say to students all the time when they are in their exam season and they are revising a lot. And I'll often say to them like, okay, well, you're on exam leave. So effectively you're setting your own schedule. How many hours are you going to do a day? You know, what's your plan? And then alarm bells always go off when the student goes, well, I'm going to probably do 8 to 10 hours a day, maybe 12. And I'm like, no, you're not. No, there's no way there's no way that you can sustain that over a sort of 1 month, you know, maybe 4 to 6 week period. There's no way. And I always say to them, just set yourself a realistic goal and adapt it. So for example, why don't you start with 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon, and then evaluate how well that was at the end of the day. How burnt out am I? Am I really tired? Am I exhausted? Do I feel that any of that actually went in? Was it good quality work? If the answer to all of that is yes, great. So let's see what happens if we add an extra hour in, maybe extra half hour in the morning, half an hour in the evening. And start with that and build up. It's that expectation of like, oh, I can do this. I'm going to absolutely run myself into the ground is not a helpful starting point at all. If anything, start small and build up and actually just test for yourself. Like, how am I doing? Can I sustain this? And if the answer is yes, crack on. If it's not, probably chill out a little bit. Yeah.
I think sometimes that perhaps can come from the length of the school day. The school day can feel really long for young people, but actually when you break it down into lesson time, it's not perhaps as long as you might think. And you're naturally forced to move classrooms. So your body is moving, you're having breaks, you're having lunch. So structuring that into your day at home is really important. So almost chunking your time into your lesson time, because actually that's how they're designed. Kind of 35, 45 minutes is the ideal time for learning. And beyond that, performance kind of starts to decline. And there is some individual differences in that, but then just getting up and moving, going outside, having a break is really important.
And I think I'm going to come back to something that we said about the time limit on the social media app of like 30 to 60 minutes maximum, ideally 0. And I think also setting a time limit on your work is sort of like, as you've just said, 30 to 45 minutes. And then a little break, and then come back and do another 45 minutes, I think is really helpful. You know, absolutely. That's going to stop you burning out. And I guess to answer the person's question directly as well, dealing with psychological burnout or feeling drained at the end of the day, I think is to remember to relax and find out and work out what helps you relax. It might be like watching a video. It might be playing on a video game or something like that. It might be reading a book or whatever, but find out what that is. Identify what helps me relax, what helps me chill out, and then implement that. Like, build that into your daily routine. If you're feeling at the end of a day you're absolutely knackered, you will be, because we're working hard. You know, the days sometimes feel long. They are long, and we are in a learning environment, and we're working. But it's about making sure that you're able to recharge your battery by having that relaxation period that's beneficial to you before you go to sleep.
Absolutely, particularly before you go to sleep. And figuring these things out, it's a great opportunity right now to learn what those strategies are for you, because many adults still don't have it down. They're still figuring out what is helpful when they come home from work and how they're going to switch off. So use this as an opportunity to kind of experiment and find what are the things that help you, because if you get them in now, it's going to kind of pay in dividends as you go into your career.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you work out there's something that works for you in your GCSE period, well, then you could carry that to A-level. You could carry it into university and your finals exams and things like that. So yeah, working out early, I think could be a massive benefit and really helpful. And hopefully implementing a lot of the things that we've talked about, like healthy habits and things like that, getting them in early can actually probably help you through education all the way through your time, however long that is. The next question was, I think, a really interesting one. So I'm going to read this one word for word, actually. So someone wrote, in school, there are a lot of friends who support me, but when they are around other people, they forget about me and they turn into what they've called fake friends. What do I do? It's actually something we've talked about in a really positive way. We talked about a support group, talking to friends or family and stuff like that. This, I guess, is really about social skills, feeling part of a group, feeling positive in that group, and I guess understanding when the group is no longer a positive place for you. What are your thoughts on that question?
I mean, social groups and friendships are really challenging. They're really difficult. I'm sure you see it at school all the time. They're so stressful and they're really complex and really hard to navigate, particularly at that age. There's a lot of moving parts and people are discovering who they are. They're learning about themselves and they're learning about their friends. So it's a really difficult time, and it's really common for friendships to shift and to change and to be really stressful and upsetting as well. So I encourage that person, if they feel like this person is their friend, perhaps they could have a separate conversation with them and just let them know. Do they know how they're leaving them feeling in a group setting? It might be that they are completely unaware and something else is going on for them. So try and perhaps have that separate conversation, and again in a really kind, gentle way, kind of do you know this is how I feel, and trying to get a sense of how they respond, but also know that everyone's really stressed and sometimes we're not our best at this time, or students aren't their best when they're feeling really stressed. So those are the things that I'd suggest is having a conversation. Also, remember there's adults around you. So go and have a chat with the teacher if you feel that would be helpful. But also think about, are there other friends that you could spend some of that time with? So if you know in that group, you don't feel good in that group, is there another group or another friend that perhaps you could spend some time with?
Absolutely. And I think going back to something we mentioned earlier about the idea of just like kindness and just being kind, I would say that if you were to approach the friend and speak to them separately, approach it with kindness, approach it in a positive light. Don't go accusing them of anything necessarily, but just actually to use that conversation to say, look, here's how I'm kind of feeling in the group at the moment. Here's some things that you've done which actually make me feel a little bit uncomfortable. And I feel that, I don't feel particularly safe or happy in that environment anymore. Offer it to them, to that friend, to then come back and say, oh my God, I didn't even realize that I did that. I'm really sorry. Let's work that out, I guess.
Yeah, well,
kindness.
Absolutely. Hopefully that's the way it goes for this person.
Hopefully.
But a really great question and a really tricky thing to experience.
Yeah, I mean, the next one is going to get even trickier. So someone has asked, and actually I think this is a really, really useful question in terms of being a good friend. So someone has asked what they should potentially do if someone they know has expressed some quite sort of harmful thoughts. So it could be as far as perhaps suicidal thoughts or maybe any thoughts of self-harm. What would you say to someone who is the friend receiving that information? What are some things that you think that they could do?
Yeah, I mean, a big pressure when someone's sharing that with you, that feels like an awful lot of responsibility. The great thing is someone feels safe enough to share their concerns with you. And actually what we know is talking about these things is really helpful because it means something can be done about it. We can support this person with what they need. So I'd say it's great that this person is talking to you, but what a pressure that must be like, what a responsibility for this young person to experience. So having that conversation is great. Chat to your friend if you feel confident enough, but make sure you share that with somebody else. So and try and do that with your friend and say, look, let's go and speak
together.
Yeah, let's go and speak. I'll come with you.
Yep.
Let's go and speak to the mental health first aider or the teacher, or I'll come with you tonight and we can speak to your family or your guardian. But trying to encourage them to share it. But it is really important that you let an adult know. Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
And they will know what to do to help you.
Great.
So if they don't, they'll know someone who will.
Absolutely. So basically, select an adult, someone in that person's life or someone neutral like a teacher, offer support to that friend, say, I will go with you, absolutely supportive. And let the kind of adult, I think, take it from there, probably. And I suppose if you're at, say, university and you're already an adult, right? I mean, I guess what we mean by adult is, I suppose, perhaps someone with authority, maybe. So even if you are at university, you are an adult. Maybe say, is there a university counsellor or is there someone attached to the university who
so universities are really set up in terms of the support. So as far as I know, all universities have counselling support. So there is real kind of services set up there. So hopefully you're informed about that on your first few days and weeks, but if not, contact your tutor or someone on your course to find out how you get in touch with those people. So absolutely, it's a really good point. When I was saying adults, we're talking about people that are also adults here, but talking to someone that you know really well, or also you have your GP services at a university. So I'd encourage you to go and have a chat with your GP, go and speak to the counsellor at your university. But also there's some really great kind of charities and support services where you can call them, or you can also text them now as well, which is really helpful. So perhaps we can put a link to that in as well. But those services are absolutely there. We've got kind of Young Minds, we've got Mind, Samaritans, those sorts of things. So if you feel like you don't want to speak to someone that you know, there's more independent and anonymous support as well.
Awesome. Definitely. Let's put those in the description. And then finally, do you believe that today's society, let's call it today's society, we'll unpack that maybe a little bit, has a significant impact on the prevalence or types of mental health challenges people face today? So today's society, the way it's geared up, having a significant impact, negative impact, let's say, on people's mental health. What are your thoughts on that? Agree, disagree?
Oh, a bit of both.
Okay, cool.
I think that we've spoken about lots of really proactive things. We're really starting to really focus on our mental health as much as our physical health. So there's some really great things going on online in terms of social media, and the conversations that we're having. I mean, we're here today. I don't think if we went back in time a little bit, perhaps this wouldn't be a conversation that we're having, particularly for students. So there's some really great things that are coming out of the societal changes, but also the big downsides of social media are a challenge too. That you said, the online bullying. A while ago, people didn't have access to us from technology. So if you are unfortunately being bullied or targeted, people have access to you even when you're not at school, for example, or at a club or at a hobby. So those sorts of things, absolutely, they're having an impact. And also we've not long been out of COVID, and that's a huge kind of societal shift. And unfortunately, it's been the perfect storm for young people, where we've seen a huge impact on their mental health because of the social isolation, the change in transitions, the impact on learning, exams, the lack of routine, conflict at home. So absolutely, there's loads of impacts, but there's also some real positives. One of them being that we're kind of really being proactive about mental health.
Excellent. Cool. That was the last of our...
I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. I think it's been great.
The whole time talking about that, couldn't we?
Yeah, and there's so many moving parts to it. You know, when you consider what today's society is, do we consider it like as a global society, or do we look at individual countries? I mean, it's a massive question. We'd have to do a whole other podcast to probably get round to all of it.
Great question.
It's a really good question. So as you've mentioned, I think in the... description to the video, I'm going to put links to some of those charities that you mentioned, because I think that's super important. I don't know if you would be cool with that, but I think maybe putting the link to your website, because I know you have a website, maybe putting that in the link as well, because, you know, perhaps some people might have heard you speak today and think that they might want to get in touch and maybe consider opening up a conversation with getting some help, maybe specifically from you.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it's not me, we can certainly kind of think about who that might be. If it's someone local to you. And I think that we didn't talk about it in great depth, but there is a real range of support out there. And lots of schools have their own support. Not all of them, unfortunately, but lots of schools have their own support services in place or have access to them. Obviously, there's your GP that you could go and chat to if you're able to. There are more kind of external services, but also those charities. So that there's real wealth of people. Sometimes it's just about knowing how to find them.
Amazing. We'll do our best to help you find them by putting things into the description, as we said, and also Grace as well will help, I guess, in any way point you in the right direction. Is there anything else you wanted to say or talk about, or anything?
I guess it might be useful just to end on the exam process is really difficult for all ages, for our GCSE students, A-levels, university. There's different challenges depending on what part of your journey that you're in. And I'd really encourage you to think about it not as a sprint, but as a marathon. And it just because you're finding it hard doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. And if you crawl over the finish line, that's absolutely okay.
Cool.
Just be kind to yourself and do your best.
Amazing. Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate it, for giving up your time. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope everyone else appreciates it as well. If you enjoyed the video and you're watching on YouTube, please do leave a like on the video, leave a comment if you want to leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it, because we've got lots of other really great interviews with people on the sort of podcast side of the YouTube channel. If you're listening along on Spotify, please do give it a little rating. 5 stars would be great, but of course, feel free to give it 1 if you wanted. But with that said, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.